what are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Hi, welcome to the Bible Nation podcast. I'm Doug Levesque. With me today is Pastor Jason Georges of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Corunna, Michigan, and also Mr. Tony Nash of AZ Business Solutions. These guys are movers and shakers in the culture here in the state of Michigan, and I appreciate you guys joining me today and helping out with this podcast. We
Always
appreciate
good to be
it.
here.
Yeah, we're off to a great start. We're getting people watching. We're getting good responses from all over the country, and I think today it's important that we kind of rehearse what just happened in Afghanistan, and we're going to call this the fall of Afghanistan. It might be the fall of the role of the United States as it's had post-Cold War, because it's huge. So as always, we have a number of articles to get through. We may or may not get through. I'm going to be reading especially an article by an Israeli. He's a TV personality over in Israel, Channel 7, and Amir Tsarfati, and well-read guy, very articulate, and so we're going to read kind of this Israeli perspective of what's just happened. I think that'll be helpful for Americans, and some of us know something wrong's there beyond just the numbers, and so he really addresses that well.
Well, everyone watching it had a sense something's not right, and this administration and the media want to get past it really quick.
Right.
Oh, yes.
You're not
Because
hearing anything about it.
We're not hearing about anything
Yes.
more. I mean, they gave it its due for 5 days while we were in the midst of it.
Yep.
I mean, obviously the tragic loss of
I always
U.S.
think,
personnel.
too, that it came on because they already were not getting traction. They needed a new news story to cover something, and sometimes they do that in a calloused way, to politically. But obviously, I think it backfired on them because 13 Marines were killed. And for us to just pass that over is disheartening, to say the least.
And this is the first time we've had any foreign conflict in 5 years, and you would think that would be headline news,
Yes.
but for some reason it's
Yes.
just getting swept under the rug.
Right.
And the deadliest day for U.S. servicemen in Afghanistan, like over a decade.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, they were in more danger in that procedure than they've been for the 10 years that they've been there.
Absolutely. So as always, you can find our podcasts, our articles, and other resources on BibleNation.org. And we're glad that folks are tuning in. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, we really are getting responses from all over the place. It's
Yeah.
been really neat to see people from all around the country have reached out and have seen it. So just, remember to like and subscribe to our channel, share it around with your friends. Let's make sure we get this out there, because this type of thought really isn't being put out there anywhere else. So
I always say, your best friends in life are people you haven't met yet. You have to be open to that. And I've already met several people that just say, hey, I listened to your podcast. And I met some new people. And, I even like people that maybe don't like everything that I say, but they like discussion, because I think strong people like to discuss things. And sometimes you can learn even a different perspective, from
100%.
someone that you disagree with, because they have
Absolutely.
different information. So
no question about it.
well, let me start off. We're just going to read a couple of paragraphs, and then we'll come back to discussion. And this man, Amir, does a wonderful job writing in the press there in Israel. He says, every now and then there are shifts in the world. These are moments that, without hyperbole, can be called game changers. What we have been watching this last week in Afghanistan is most certainly one of these game-changing moments. Not since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union have we witnessed this big an alteration in the geopolitical landscape. These past 7 days, and of course this was written over a week ago, have seen the end of America as the world's number one superpower, and have left us in what now can be considered a post-American era. This is an American friend. This is a pro-American person, and who really knows geopolitics, who has a huge audience in the Middle East, across the Middle East, amongst Jews and Arabs, and he is saying that this is the biggest game changer, and this is the end of America as the world's number one superpower, and we can now be considered a post-American era. I've always said that we're kind of in a post-Christian America, and so, it makes sense blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, that now we would have a post-American era. We're back in the Wild West. He goes on to
The
say,
two are certainly related.
right. I'm not saying these words for shock power, nor am I in any way gloating. I'm an Israeli with a deep love for the United States. There is no greater friend that my country has had in our 73 years of existence than the U.S., and there are many in America that I consider to be as close to me as family. That is why it is with great pain and sorrow that I write these words. But it needs to be said, and maybe it takes someone from the outside who can look at the situation objectively and who has access to news and media that isn't driven by party agenda. In other words, if you just listened into Fox versus MSNBC, you're not getting really the right message.
Yeah, I was going to say, does that exist here in America?
Right. What has taken place this week in Afghanistan has shown the world that America under this present administration is, as one Chinese TV host put it, a quote-unquote paper tiger. It may look big and scary on the outside, but when an Islamist terrorist army came marching to Kabul, rather than standing up against it, the U.S. military continued to pull out, abandoning its friends and allies and breaking its promises. Please understand that this is not a knock on the United States military. If U.S. forces were allowed to give a full vent to their power and skill, the Taliban would be reduced to smoldering ash heaps in hours. It is the finest, strongest military in the world, but even a small child can throw rocks at a great bear if the great bear is penned up in a cage. And the penning up in the cage is not something that the Russians have done or the Chinese have done. It's something that the Biden administration and leftists in our own country have done.
Self-imposed.
And the appointed generals that even the left is saying should lose their job have managed to somehow misunderstand, miscalculate, or just flat out in cowardice and capitulation, let these things open. So, what do you guys think?
They're operating with a different worldview.
Absolutely.
So in a worldview, and it's ignorance and pride, a worldview that evil doesn't exist.
Right.
This idea of equality of societies and cultures, which is not true.
Right.
There is not equality.
Maybe
there are superior cultures.
Legal equality through the UN. I mean, we're never opposed to that. But other than that, there's not really.
Well, there's equality of men before God.
Right.
But but when men decide to come together and create culture and society, not every cultural idea is superior or equal, and not every societal. And so, but this administration, their worldview is there's the American society and culture. There is the Afghanistan or the Islamic Taliban version of that, which all Islamic, but that particular version of it, culture and society, and they're not equals.
Yeah,
they're not equals, and so they can't be treated that way.
Biden's been a senator or vice president for now 48 years. Now he's the president, and so I mean, you're saying I'm going to turn my back on all that American exceptionalism because America isn't exceptional, and then that's kind of what you're saying. Do you agree with Mr. Tsarpati that that this is a game-changing situation and that this is a cultural maybe end of the American era?
Well, history is defined, it's marked by the shift of empires. I mean, we look at the Greco Empire, the Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and now empire is a bad word. It's not politically correct to say that, but the United States has been a benevolent empire.
Right.
And yet this action, if this is what's being acknowledged on the world stage, we're in the midst of a transition. We're in the midst of a shift because our benevolence was built upon our ability to project ourselves or to control or to influence. And when you lose that influence, then you lose the benevolence.
Right.
We can have a broken heart all that we might, but we have no recourse to do anything about it.
Right.
And the world, history has shown, is better with a benevolent, empowered United States of America.
Those nations that you just mentioned, Alexander the Great went as far as Afghanistan. Kandahar is really the name Alexander. It was one of his, and there's still 3 or 4 standing cities that are rubble, but that he built, or that the people that followed him built. So that was kind of the extent of the Greek Empire, and that was the end of the Greek Empire. And you could say that for every empire. Obviously, it crushed Russia. They crushed the British. They fought 3 wars there, from World War II back to, I think, 1849 or something like that. They fought 3 different wars there. And then even when you look at the Muslim dynasties, Afghanistan, is almost the pagan side of the Muslim world. And so they fought those Muslim dynasties as they were going through. Even the Khans, Kublai Khan, all those guys, and their generations, they went through there and kind of had to skirt that because it was mountainous and they were horse people. And so it is without, he doesn't really go into that, but the reality is Afghanistan has always been a dying place for that. Nobody knows what to do with the particular geography, mentality. The Bible talks about the Prince of Persia, and we know that's Iran, but this is kind of, cornering the Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. And so it's like it's got a different spirit. Nations talk about their gods, and it definitely, we've run up against it here. And so, I'm an American. I still have my flag waving at my house, and I like to believe that maybe we can straighten things out and fly right, because we have, in the past. But it is linked to spiritual faithfulness. And, I think the current administration also just wants one world where we all become equal. But God designed nations, and ultimately, even in what Christians call the millennial age, the golden age, where, God is ruling over all, he's ruling over the nations. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that, he judges the nations. Mm-hmm. And annually, the nations come to him or they don't come to him. And so nationhood has responsibility.
Yes, because consistently in Scripture, he is against nations coming together to build one tower.
Yes.
He's always against that.
Yes. And we've been right at that, we've been right at that. Okay, let me go on to the second part of the article. So, a changed world. What led to this situation? Not surprisingly, many fingers in Washington and in the press are pointing at the previous U.S. president, a.k.a. Donald Trump. But that is based on either ignorance or a willful distortion of the facts. It is true that the previous president did plan to pull troops out of Afghanistan, but it was going to be measured by withdrawal based on a deal that he had established between President Ashraf Ghani and the Taliban. Now, he's a deal maker. You don't make deals with friends. You sometimes make deals with buyers, or you make deals with, you're going to get the better end of the deal. And so Trump made a deal, the art of the deal, with these guys, Ghani and the Taliban. Ghani has sided against Trump with the Democrats even prior to the election. Under the deal, Ghani would release 5,000 prisoners to the Taliban. In return, the Taliban would not attack the Afghani forces or the U.S. military. The American president threatened the Taliban mullah he was dealing with, saying that if he broke the deal, he would hit them like they'd never been hit before. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hit you hugely, right? And so he said that, and I think people probably believed that was going to happen. That
he was
be
crazy
the case.
Enough to do it.
They thought he would win the election. So many people have interest in our election. So to think that our election is not tampered with by Russia, China, Afghanistan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, whatever, is foolish. He even mentioned by name the village that the mullah came from. In other words, I'll flatten your whole village. That's the deal we're making, right? Ghani, for his part, never liked the agreement that the 45th president brokered. He worked hard with his friends in the American Democratic Party to sabotage the deal. But the pact was signed in Qatar in 2020, and for the next 1.5 years, no American soldier was lost to the Taliban. Right? So you can't say that there wasn't a deal cut, that it wasn't public, and that it didn't work up until the election. Then the new administration came in and immediately canceled the deal between the Afghanis and the Taliban. You can go on, say, YouTube or something and find Vice journalism, V-I-C, it's like a name brand, and they have some stuff, and they actually are talking to that Taliban leader and saying, what are you going to do? They interviewed him at the point where it was canceled, and they were warning back at that time, if Biden cancels this is what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So this is documented, that everybody knew what happened. It was public. This guy's not blowing smoke. And the Taliban said, Biden, if you don't keep the deal, then we're going to
Which also speaks of the organization of the Taliban. Because I think most Americans think them as cave-dwelling,
right,
tribal, but they have organization, and they were able to say, no one kills Americans for a year and a half, and everyone listened.
Basically, during the Russian, fiasco, a lot of people, a lot of orphans were created, and the Pakistani Pashtuns and their mosques took in all those orphans, and they raised them in these madrasas. And Taliban means the student. The student is a student movement, like a student revolution. It was Islamo-communism, really. And this is what they learned, and they went back to, it was, and of course, at first they delivered. The streets were safe, the Russians were gone, the different militias that were, corrupt, and they had, you could bank, you could walk the streets, and da-da-da. At first, they brought in some order, and then, of course, they said everyone's got to have a beard, and the women can't show their face, and so it turned into totalitarianism there. But they still have that organization with backing from Sunni Muslims, and in particular the Pashtuns of Pakistan.
Well, I think one thing that is important for people to understand is to them, this is a holy war. To them, just like you and I would fight for the cause of Christ, in their mind, they are fighting for the cause of their religious fervor and beliefs and ideals, even to the point where they would commit suicide to fight for it. And so they believe what they're doing is absolutely right according to their belief. And that's why it's so important that the nation that that you're a part of is a Bible nation, because you see, these religious extremes are taking them to these measures.
But they're also they're not apples to apples.
Right.
And so even like our ideal of their self-sacrifice of life, their value of life is different.
Yeah.
They value it. They put a different metric upon it.
Yeah.
And the same thing upon time, because history has shown 20 years to that civilization is nothing. They inherently have a longer perspective. We'll wait this out.
Right.
Knowing that 20 years is a long time. They haven't done anything for 20 years.
They don't have a life insurance company over there. And so what happens is some of these guys say, well, I've got a wife and kids, I got a mother and father, and I'm going to go fight and die, and the Taliban will give my parents this and such and so. And so, they'll get in the tank and drive the tank and blow it up. And it's filmed, and they said goodbye, and that was their life insurance policy. And so, it is a totally different mentality. It's not apples for apples.
What would be common would be the self-interest that all men kind of hold, but how you obtain that self-interest is different.
Yes.
Well, my point was that their belief is they're fighting this religious, cause.
At the core, it's an ongoing millennial fight. Then the new administration came in and immediately canceled the deal between the Afghanis and the Taliban. In its place, they presented nothing. They just began to pull out and figured the Afghanis could take care of themselves. The Taliban, seeing the deal gone, decided they had no choice but to take over. They began overwhelming little pockets of Afghanistan here and there. The Afghan army that the Americans had trained, funded, and equipped just dropped their weapons and ran away. Soon the pockets of Taliban control spread and began to merge. And before the world knew it, the Taliban army was closing in on Kabul. What was predicted to take 2 to 4 months took 2 to 4 days. And Biden slipped with that. We knew that things would fall back, but we just were getting out. We weren't making a deal with anybody. We weren't going to let Trump have any credit. Even the Taliban was shocked at how easy it was, with many areas around the country falling without even a fight. Then President Ghani, as a corrupt politician as one can find, fled the country with $169 million. No doubt money that we had given him for the government. The nation was leaderless, and the Taliban happily stepped in to fill the vacuum. When the United States saw the Afghani army had completely collapsed, they signed a pact with the Taliban asking for a period of time to let them safely pull their personnel out. Just a note, I asked my father, Dad, does this feel like Saigon 1975? Because that's what it's almost like they were trying to write this story that it was connected or whatever. And Dad said, no way. He said, there were helicopters leaving Saigon and the embassy. He said, but we still had air bases there, that didn't leave. And we left the country to the South Vietnamese. And there was a years of fight yet in the South Vietnamese army. So far as the Americans have fled, they have left behind billions of dollars worth of military equipment. Just like that, the Taliban has gone from hiding out in the wilderness of Afghanistan to becoming one of the best armed terrorist militias in the world. The present situation in Afghanistan comes right out of a dystopian nightmare. While the Taliban puts on a front of a kinder, gentler terrorist force, the Afghanis know what is really going on. Murder, execution, rape, child trafficking, that is what is taking place away from the cameras and the Western news sources. Unfortunately for the perpetrators, their evil deeds can't escape phones and social medias. The postings have been horrific. He goes on to talk about the scenes that were at the airport, the bodies of desperate ones grabbing onto planes and then falling out, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, we know that Christians have been martyred by the thousands already there, because they just view that as an American part of the atrocity.
And what a testament to the validity of Christianity.
Right.
Because they weren't letting they couldn't unbelieve the truth.
Right.
When confronted with violence, they couldn't unbelieve what they really believe.
Right. We have to shut down the theaters and the art and the universities and da-da-da. We have to shut all this stuff down, and we have to get rid of this other religious influence because that's not what we can do.
You had mentioned billions of dollars in equipment left behind. I wanted to share. I had this.
I thought that was great that you found. Share that.
Yeah. So from best accounts, there was 3,012 Humvees, 32 M117 helicopters, 3 C-130 Hercules transport planes, 43 MD-530 light helicopters, 33 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters.
33 Black Hawk helicopters?
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, apparently they know how to fly.
Yeah.
23 just light attack planes, A-29s, 20,000 grenades, 10 light counterinsurgency planes, 7,000 plus machine guns and automatic weapons, 1,300 grenade launchers, and the list goes. I mean, there's more and more, but
I mean, that's a division, not just a mechanized division. It's an armored division with air support. That's what we gave them.
Right.
Now, somebody, I've done some reading on Afghans and how they fought the Russians and et cetera, and what they had done, because the Russians could overpower them, is a father would have sons. The father would stay on the farm, and he would send one son to the mountains to fight with the militia, with the resistance. He would send the other son to go to the cities to work with the Russians. And the brothers knew then both the intelligence. They knew where to fight, where not to fight. They knew how to fake a fight, et cetera, et cetera. There was going to be deaths, unfortunately. But the father knew, we're not going to take sides with the British. We're not going to take sides with the British, whatever. And that was how they do. And then after some time, they would switch. So someone's having the deprivations of living in the mountains. The other guy's, come over and he's everyone's favorite collaborator, And so they just played that. I think we just got played because we armed these guys. They ran to Tajikistan, gave some of their stuff to the Tajikistanis, left some of the stuff, and then came back, gave their uniforms and guns back. A lot of them have come back and they're already good to go. In other words, that was the plan.
Right.
I mean,
yes, not played by the Taliban, played by the Afghan National Army.
Yeah.
Because they knew that's what they were going to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every one of those men had already, and leaders, let's get it to the leader level.
Right.
Okay. Had already made up their mind. When this happens, I know what I'm going to do. Because it was so unanimous.
And the president had 169 million. I wonder what the generals had. Because maybe they went over and sold their equipment to the Russians. Because the Russians are now putting their foot back in the stands, which was the former CCP. So, I mean, the shamefacedness of leaving that. We weren't expecting. We thought we had months to pull some of that equipment out. Now, no doubt, we left stuff in Germany and Japan and Italy, and I mean, no doubt, I know we left tanks. We have a huge tank park in Kuwait. Mm-hmm. And we never brought that there. It's just sitting there for the future. And we kind of parked them and we mothballed them, but they're there for us to sell or use or whatever. So no doubt that's been happened in the past. But in this case, the plans went awry. And so we were not planning on them having all these things to that extent. 3,000 Humvees. See, you could always bring those Humvees home and sell them to the public.
Yeah, but now we're getting the global forces at play in this thing. Okay, so first you have the military-industrial complex, who is happy to have customers to buy and use up Humvees so we can make more Humvees.
Now we got to get the new J trucks, they call them. They're taking the place of the Humvee. Right?
And the weapons to counteract the weapons we've just given up. I mean, it's a script right out of Hollywood.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's actually, or a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what's happened. But then also now the influence or the coming in of China to reap the natural resources.
Right.
So China's already the leader in manufacturing, but they require resources to manufacture.
Yeah.
And now this is the isolation of the United States even greater, because we don't have manufacturing, nor do we have the ability to garner our own resources.
Right.
I mean, it's like you're trying to lose the board game.
No, I mean, there's a number of factors. And to me, I never say one guy's that smart. There's a crowd in a room. But man, I mean, all those guys can't be that dumb either. And so It's a comedy of errors. Somebody probably wanted it this way, but to me, it's hellish. It's demonic. It definitely is deserved. It's like the Lord's taken his hand off some of the blessing.
And it's ripe for a global leader.
And it's ripe for a global leader. So let's go on to ripple effect, because that's kind of what we're talking about now. The purpose of this special edition newsletter, he says, is less about Afghanistan itself than about the ripple effects of what has just taken place. He says Lake Afghanistan is connected to everything. It's connected to India. It's connected to China. It's connected to Pakistan. It's connected to Iran. It's connected to Russia through the stands. So there's a huge ripple effect here. As mentioned earlier, China is feeling the ripples. What is it that has kept the powerful nation from taking Taiwan, an inland nation they have coveted for decades? American power. Now China is flexing its muscle and increasing its threats. Hu Jinjin, editor-in-chief of the Global Times, a state-affiliated media outlet, tweeted, quote, "After the fall of the Kabul regime, the Taiwan authorities must be trembling. Don't look forward to the U.S. to protect them. Taipei officials need to quietly mail order a 5-star red flag from the Chinese mainland. It will be useful one day when they surrender to the PLA, People's Liberation Army." So that's the ripple effect for China. Beijing is also positioning China as the world's new moderate voice of reason and helpfulness. They present themselves as the ones who are prepared to enter Afghanistan to help fix the mess that the unhinged, war-thirsty, bumbling Americans have left behind. They've also worked out the deal, this is what you were talking about, Jason, with the Taliban to mine and exploit an estimated $1 to $3 trillion of rare minerals in the country, promising the Islamic government a healthy cut. If there's any nation in the world that should have U.S. citizens feeling nervous, it's China. The ripple effect of Afghanistan has reached the shores of the hermit kingdom of North Korea. Obviously, this was about a week ago, but this week Korea launched ballistic missiles again, and you didn't hear any response from America, but you've heard responses from the South Koreans, who just had the Chinese in to try to reopen, not the Americans, they had the Chinese in to reopen them. And then Japan came out and said, this can't happen either, but you haven't heard anything from America. So we've abandoned our allies, and North Korea knows that. Iran is riding the ripple by going full bore on its uranium enrichment. In fact, the day that this was happening in Afghanistan, the D-Day in Afghanistan, the new Israeli Prime Minister Bennett, that had ousted Netanyahu, was at the White House, was supposed to meet at the White House. They put him off for a day because of this, and then he went in there, and Joe Biden fell asleep during the meeting publicly on television, and so that's got to be a message to Iran. So they said full enrichment, and so Bennett went home and basically said, we're on our own, and we're not going to let this happen. So we're pushing this Israeli-Iranian war.
And isolated Israel without a friend to influence her.
Yes.
It's also another wild card on the table.
They have nukes.
Right.
If Damascus is going to be gone in a day, it might not be an axis of power. It might be Israel that does that. The ripples are rolling north to a country that also knows a little about leaving Afghanistan in ignominious defeat, Russia. And Putin is hoping for contracts for the military and commercial rebuilding of the country. He's trying to rebuild the Soviet republics that were there. Ukraine, in particular, is wondering how long it will be before Vladimir Putin stops knocking at the door and just kicks it down, because we were upholding Ukraine. Remember, everybody was mad about some conversation Trump had about Ukraine. He was impeached on it, and then Biden's son is over there with millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of contracts. Biden's got conversations going with Ukraine. There's money under the table from the Russian supporting side of the Ukrainian issue. And so that's all kind of behind, the scenes. There is also no one left to confront the growing presence of Russia, Iran, and Turkey in Syria. Nobody left. As an aside, Turkish President Erdogan also covets his part of the new Afghanistan, hoping to be the Sunni Islam presence in the nation's building, alongside secular Russia and China. But in Syria, Russia, Iran, and Turkey together have become an axis of power situated just north of Israel. And listen to what he says. One day, this coalition of armies will swoop down and devastate my nation. This is a man that knows his Bible, Old and New Testament. And this is the coalition of nations in Ezekiel. I don't know if he quotes Ezekiel in this particular passage, but he does go to the prophecies then and saying, this prophecy has never lined up. Russia and Persia have never lined up like the Bible said they were for 3,500 years of their existence of nations until now. And now they're lined up with Turkey as well. So he mentions Ezekiel 38 and 39. When the 45th president was in office, peace was spreading through the Middle East. Any bad actors had to have one eye to their gun sights and one eye to the sky looking for that missile that just might be racing towards them. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Ayatollah Khomeini, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan knew that they could push boundaries, but that there was a point of too far. Now with the 46th president, we've seen that too far no longer exists. Then he mentions, he says, Damascus is going to be gone in a day. That's his final word on this particular thing. And so that is a non-American but pro-American perspective of what really just took place there. So let's talk about ripple effects.
Yeah, and we ought to worry. I mean, we ought to be concerned. I mean, the president tried to soothe us with over-the-horizon ability, which is a farce in the sense of what really needs to happen in Afghanistan. Anyone that knows geography, when you're talking about over the horizon, you're talking about over Iran
or Russia,
over Pakistan. I mean, even just to get from the ocean,
or Russia, or China,
from a carrier.
Yeah, we paid Pakistan $1 billion during the Afghanistan war to allow us to go through their airspace and to drive through and to go and so we paid them a bunch of money just to stay out of it.
Yeah,
So what do you think? I mean, obviously having put everything together on what happened, just I think everyone that's listening now is well informed. What do you think, from your perspective, is the big agenda? Why is President Biden doing this? What's going on?
I'm not one that thinks Biden is this great evil and he's behind the scenes, because he's never been that. He's always just been, where's the money? How do you want me to vote? That's why he stayed the Maryland senator for 40 years. That's why they put him. That's why Obama just said, this guy's no problem to me. He'll do what he wants to do. And so that was why he's no problem. And he was a nameless, faceless vice president that did nothing. And then the fact that he would run for president, it was just his turn. He had been loyal. So whoever the minders were know that we've got him. And so he's just doing what he's told. So I don't think he's this great evil thing, but I think that's a curse for America that we don't have a leader. I mean, we're a leaderless nation right now. There might be other people pulling different strings, but they're disparate. They got different ideas. And so I do think America's in trouble. I do think it's a point in time. I think as far as Afghanistan's concerned, and that ripple effect has left this vacuum that everyone's trying to fill. And so I'd hate to say I don't care about Afghanistan, but I mean, a missionary that goes there now is sure as dead. Doesn't mean they shouldn't go, but it sure is dead. And the walls, the Bible says that the Euphrates will dry up, and maybe that's a metaphor. There's no more protection of the American army on the Euphrates River. It's gone. It's done. And that's what he's saying. He's saying this coalition will devastate my country in the future, and he says it's soon. And so I think we should look to Damascus. And I think it's not only a mark of American, hegemony kind of dying, or someone else is rising, but I think it's a picture of last days as well.
Especially with Israel being led not with a nationalist, but more of a globalist.
And he said that, I didn't read all the article, but he said that the present government that ousted Netanyahu,
right, which was very nationalist,
right, that basically it's very weak as well. And so it looks like a sitting duck. It looks like a weak target now. So I think we can expect that kind of conflict. And the only protection Israel has is that, number one, it's been fierce, and number two, it has nukes. Either to preempt, because it will preempt, or to respond with. So I think that's where we're at. And then America, because we have different leadership, who they're cheating, the media's helping them, whatever. None of it's true, but they're going to side against Israel. Our country will side against Israel if Israel uses nukes.
And not to toot our own horn,
right,
or not to toot your horn, but let's do a little tooting here.
Yeah.
I mean, just if you're watching this, mark the date, mark the time, mark when it was said.
Yes.
Because you'll review this in 2 or 3 years. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, you wrote "Surviving This Babylon," and the very world that we were taught, that we were saying that you needed skills, biblical skills, in order to survive and thrive in, is the world that we're dealing with today here in America. And so,
Bible Nation article, "The Anatomy of a World War."
Yeah,
and basically we talk about these same issues.
Right.
Another one, "The Gates Are Overrun." So America doesn't just have one problem that's going to kill it, but it's got these multiplicities of problems, and we can't run and cover every gate, every wall. And so that was happening, under the Clinton administration or the Bush administration.
Yeah. What are the dates on those articles?
And
I mean, those are at least 8, 9 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we started. Let's see I don't see it right here at the top,
Right.
brother. But yeah, these are.
I'm
easily
saying we're
4 years
not
ago.
new to
11,
this.
12,
We're not
easy,
new to this.
2001.
We might be a new podcast.
No.
But we're not new to this
We've
conversation.
been saying this. We've been saying this
We've been saying
in all and honestly about these Middle Eastern nations as well. But it's funny that when all this was going, the headlines came down. This one's from Forbes. Expectations are realistically high for women in the Afghan peace talks. Okay, what did women get? You can go to the university, but you have to wear your mask and you have to go to a girls' class. I'm not sure that didn't already exist. That's not something new or a capitulation
Right.
On their behalf. Here's BBC. Is Russia arming the Afghan Taliban? This is dated April 2018. Russia was supporting the Taliban, undermining our election from a different perspective. Nobody talked about it. The Pacific Standard. What Afghan soldiers think about U.S. troop withdrawal and Taliban peace talks, March 2019. So this, and it's got it really is talking about the Taliban and the president and their relationship. So the Afghan soldiers knew this is horrible. This is going to happen. Don't leave. Right. Basically, the Afghan soldiers that were nationalists said, don't leave. And there's a whole bunch of the articles that because Afghanistan came out and because we were losing, this is Foreign Policy magazine. What's next for Christian Zionists? Council on Foreign Relations, Christian Evangelicals and U.S. Foreign Policy. This one is the New Republic, the Christianization of U.S. foreign policy, talking about now we're losing. So it's interesting that the fall of Afghanistan is being tied by these major foreign policy media heads as the loss of the influence of evangelical Christians in foreign policy. The Atlantic magazine, which is Harvard, Foreign Policy and Christian Conscience. All these things were then referred to and brought out. So not only is it the end of American hegemony, it's the end of evangelical influence in the Christians. So that's what the other side is really rejoicing about. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we'll share all the links to these articles in the description of the video. So if you want to look these things up yourself, because I know we can get all of them, but those will be available for you to read through. And
as we feel like we're being defeated and we're retreating, what do you guys think is the hopeful message to Christians? Because we're feeling it here too. I mean, there's walls coming down. Israel's feeling it, but we're feeling the same thing here in a sense. So what do you say to those people in closing today?
Jesus is king.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things are happening underneath his authority, not outside of it. They're not these events and these circumstances, these leaders, these elected officials operate not separate or independent of. They're not competitors of Christ's plan.
Right.
And so, and I think the hope is to those that are watching, the fig tree is shedding its leaves.
Yeah.
It's progressing.
Yeah.
We're not ignorant of these things. So you're watching, you're looking, and we don't have our head in the sand. And so our blessed hope is nigh. It's near.
Yeah.
And so, and that's not escapist mentality. That's simply reality.
Yeah.
That the events of the world are unfolding right before our eyes. And I mean, the encouragement to believers is, we like to live in this era that the world will always be the same as it always is.
Yeah, but it's not.
That my childhood would be the childhood of my children, that this decade will be very similar to the last decade. And no, every day is precious. Every opportunity is precious. The time to believe God and live for God is now.
Yeah.
And so, get serious about God now.
I mean, the different empires, like you said, all transitioned to another empire. I mean, their day ended and another transition came. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then on through, now America, and then that is ending. I mean, it really is. It's shriveling apart, but God will use Gentile nations until he doesn't. And so that might be where we're at, but that doesn't mean that God does not work in a Christian man or woman or family or community as well. And so I think we have to hold on to our local churches, influences, and communities, hold on to the people that are like-minded.
So let me add on to that, because what I said previously was very centric on our perspective where we are in time, history, and even country. In the grander perspective, if the Lord's return should tarry, that as empires have shifted and changed, none of them have been capable of extinguishing Christianity.
Praise the Lord.
It has always remained.
Right.
So if the Lord's plan is for us to have more empires that are going to rise and fall, what is constant, what is for sure, history, even an apologetic view of history, is that Christianity will survive. Nay, I say, it will thrive. So we are, our citizenship is not solely, it's not held in these national identities only, but we have a heavenly citizenship, and that nationality, pilgrims, that is going to continue.
As far as Afghanistan's concerned, there might be somebody in prison right now that's a Christian that God will deliver and that will come back and be an influence in his nation someday in the future. We know that because that's how it is. But we need to truly be praying for Afghanistan. You know, I'm ashamed because as an American, we just left people hanging.
And we didn't have to.
So we need to be humble, apologetic. I don't know if we'll have opportunity to make that particular thing right. At the same time, we need to stand up for those 13 soldiers that were lost by the enemy, and we need to pray for their families and not be afraid to be have a strong military and function as such.
And as American Christians, why should we be impervious or immune to suffering? And if it's our time to suffer, I mean, we have brothers and sisters all around the world. Now we talk about coming tribulation, and what they would describe as, I'm in tribulation right now.
Yeah.
And so why are we immune to that?
And I think we're feeling the closeness of that. And so we just need to suffer for well-doing is acceptable with God.
Well, and I think that probably every Christian generation has thought they're in the last days.
Right.
I'm sure that's probably, the Bible
We're
tells us to watch.
Right,
Absolutely. So but we certainly know that it's imminent.
Yeah.
And it certainly feels like you're seeing Revelation unfold more and more and more. And so I think the message to the believer is, don't waste time. Redeem the time, because the days are certainly evil. Have that conversation with that lost loved one. Be in church. Pastors, stand up. The pulpit has to be a center for these kind of messages, because the day of touchy-feely, everybody feels good, we have to get people on board that Christ is returning and time is short and people need to come to Christ.
Get on the boat.
Well, all right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I mean, we've covered a lot here. I think there's a lot more, and I hope that folks will contact us and tell us what you think. And if you need some of this conversation in your church or community or whatever, we'd be happy to help with that. And so don't forget to go to BibleNation.org. Check us out. Communicate with us. Remember, the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven, and it works.